Welcome one and all for the webinar program conducted by Arulmigu Palaniyandavar Arts College for Women, and my sincere thanks to the convener Dr. N. Bhuvaneshwari, Principal APA College, and special thanks to the organizing secretary Dr. S. Muthulashmi, and immense pleasure to the coordinators Dr. R. Uma Mageshwari and Mrs. Bhavadarani from the Zoology Department, and I am Dr. S. Krishnamurthy, Secretary of Dr. N. Research Foundation, Madurai.
Today we are going to see the ecosystem restoration.
Introduction. So the World Environment Day on June 5 marks the formal launch of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration from 2021 to 2030. A decade where efforts to the massive scale up the restoration of degraded and destroyed the ecosystem will be made. So the declaration of 2021 to 2030 as the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is purposeful and hopeful. So bearing in mind the unsettling revelation of landmark scientific findings of the state of our biosphere. So it reveals that the decade matters most in preventing the catastrophic climatic change and bending the curve on biodiversity loss. So without which an estimated 1 million species face the threat of extinction, many within a decade. While there is some momentum on a global response to the threats of climate change, it is imperative that human action is rooted in restoration of the world's degraded and destroyed ecosystem. With the window for action becoming ever so small, in halting and reversing the trends of biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation, the UN Decade hopes to inspire the global movement A Generation for Restoration. In support states the FAO, our global food system and the livelihood of many millions of people depends on all of us working together to restore the healthy and sustainable ecosystem for today and the future. So currently, about 20% of the planet's vegetative surface show the declining trends in the productivity with a fertility losses linked to the erosion. So depletion and pollution in all the parts of the world, and by 2050 degradation in climate change could reduce the crop yield by 10% globally and up to 50% in the certain regions. The restoration of 350 million hectares on degraded land between now and 2030 would be generate $9 trillion in ecosystem service, while clearing the atmosphere of 13 to 26 gigatons of greenhouse gas out of the atmosphere. Our provisions of manifold kinds like food, water, timber, fuel, fiber, medicines, dyes, oils, etc. are from ecosystems. So ecosystem performs regulating functions like purifying the air for breathing, filtering the water for drinking, and pollinating flowers to produce the fruits, generating the soil from the rocks, and decompose the organic matter and integrate to the soil to make it fertile and oxygenated. Healthy vegetation covers prevent the soil erosion and flooding by regulating the water flow. More safeguard our humans from landslides in the vicinity of intact natural forest. Carbon storage in the biomass has a crucial role in climatic regulation. On the cultural front, ecosystem render the priceless service. Patches of primal forest protected as a sacred groves while serving as a sources of perennial water and as gene foods for the posterity are still worshipped in the villages as the abodes of gods, and scenic value ecosystem render the runs tourism and recreation. They inspire through the time musicians, poets, painters, photographers and filmmakers. Supporting services from ecosystems notably are photosynthesis to oxygenate the air and water, nutrient cycle, etc. are the critical to sustain the quality life on Earth. Ecosystem restoration type comprises the following component like erosion control, reforestation, removal of non-native species and weeds, revegetation of disturbed areas, daylighting streams, reintroduction of native species and habitat range improvement for target species. The 8 vital types of ecosystem include forest, farmlands, grassland and savannas, rivers and lakes, oceans and coast, towns and cities, peatlands, mountains. Importance of ecosystem restoration in a post-COVID world. The COVID-19 emergence has unleashed some drastic consequences and revealed how disastrous the loss of ecosystem can be. We cannot attain sustainable development goals in the absence of ecosystem restoration. Preventing the biodiversity loss is the key to our survival post the pandemic. Taking into account of the gravity of the situation and encouraging the revival of the ecosystem, the United Nations has officially declared the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration 2021 to 2030 on this World Environment Day 2021. According to its guidelines, we as a community can participate in this hashtag Generation Restoration, a global ecosystem revival initiative. Preventing, halting, reversing the decline of ecosystem globally form the main goal of the ecosystem restoration to safeguard the environment in a post-COVID world. After all, the sustainable use and restoration of biodiversity would be the best way to mitigate the post-COVID-19 crisis. The restoration can ensure getting rid of 13 to 26 gigatons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere in the post-COVID world. Removal of 350 million hectares of degraded terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem would guarantee a better, greener, healthier environment to support the life. This slide shows the ecosystem service from forest, such as providing a water even in summer, is usually forgotten. A chance to mend the fractured relationship with nature. However, through the several decades, having often served short-term economic interests, our actions have resulted in a diminished ability of ecosystem to provide and support both the humans and biota in the long term. Homogenized landscapes, reduction in the productivity of the land and aquatic ecosystems, in water quality and genetic and functional diversities, alongside increasing the risk of climatic change. Spread of the zoonoses and episodes of disaster bear the witness to a fractured relationship with the nature. A recent study published in Nature indicates that restoring as much as 15% of land in priority areas would avoid the 60% of expected extinctions and remove around a third of the extra carbon dioxide that has been pumped into the atmosphere. In hindsight, if we had proactively invested in the sustainable use and management of our environment, it is likely that many of the crises of our times, such as COVID-19, so the climate and the extinction crisis would have been avoided to the large extent. It is in the spirit that UN Decades calls for the transformative way of working and seeks to catalyze a global movement. It recognizes that restoration cannot be achieved without a participation of the whole society and needs to be a self-driven, participatory, and carried out in the decentralized manner, following guiding principles on ecosystem protection and restoration. For India, scaling up ecosystem restoration activities assumes national importance as India is one of the mega biodiverse country of the world, holding four of the world's biodiversity hotspots. Owing to its diverse physical and climatic conditions, it accounts for nearly 8% of recorded species with approximately 47,000 plant species and over 1 lakh animal species. However, the pressure on the ecosystem and biodiversity is also immense as India, within a 2.4% of world land area, supports the 18% of the global human population and accounts for the 15% of world's livestock. Ecosystem restoration can help in the post-COVID recovery. Further, the ecosystem restoration for India is not only about the protecting its ecosystem and biodiversity or mitigating the impacts of crises occurring at global scale. It provides a solution to solving the challenges of food and water security and securing the livelihoods and all the well-being of the millions of the country. So nearly half of the India's 1.3 billions are directly depend upon the agriculture and forest, with approximately 20%, including the indigenous community, women and marginal farmers, they depend on the forest. A 2018 study on the economics of desertification, land degradation and drought in India done for the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change revealed that India's GDP suffers a loss of 2.5% on account of land degradation and the cost of inaction would be far greater than that of a restoration. So moreover, with the land degradation and climate change closely intertwined, so the Economic Survey of India in 2017 to 18 indicated that impact of climate change could reduce the agriculture income by 25%. In the post-COVID context, with an estimated 10 million Indians having lost their jobs from the second wave, investing in ecosystem restoration becomes even more essential in addressing the rising unemployment rates and dipping household incomes. While conventional strategies in crisis recovery often deprioritize nature conservation and generally looked upon as a complementary role, and nature conservation and restoration are not opposing the goals but rather serves as a long-term vision for society and for economics. In the United Nations Environment Program UNEP has found that for every dollar that is invested into the restoration, at least $9 of economic benefits can be expected in return. Given that approximately 30% of India's land area, that is 96.4 million hectares, stand degraded, scaling up ecosystem restoration will address these complex and wide-ranging issues including the biodiversity, climate, livelihoods and food security in the country. Recognizing the importance of restoration to the socio-economic well-being of the country as well as the attainment of sustainable development goals, India has made substantial commitment to restoration. It joined the Bond Challenge in 2015 with a pledge to restore the 13 million hectares of degraded and deforested land by 2020 and an additional 8 million hectares by 2030. This was further increased to a target of 26 million hectares by 2030 during the Conference of Parties of the United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification held in Delhi in September 2019. Moreover, as one of its three nationally determined contributions, India has also committed the creation of carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent from additional forest and tree cover by 2030. This slide shows a degraded mangrove strand in Kerala and restoration of ecosystems such as this can have environmental and economical benefits from the Kerala. The blending in with existing national programs in India, restoration targets are reflected in several of its flagship program. Directly, the National Afforestation Program is focused on the rehabilitation degraded forest and afforestation around the forest. And further, the National Mission for the Green India under the National Action Plan and the climatic change is aimed at the improving that increasing tree cover as a climatic adaptation and mitigation strategy. A key focus of the National Biodiversity Action Plan is also implement strategies for the reduction in rates of the degradation, fragmentation and loss of natural habitats. So recognition that the natural resources are intrinsically linked to rural livelihood is also reflected in the flagship schemes like the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Schemes and National Rural Livelihood Mission. However, in achieving restoration both at pace and at scale, there is a need to overcome the various barriers to the large scale of restoration. The UN decade has identified 6 primary barriers to scaling the restoration. These include limited awareness of society of the negative effects of ecosystem degradation and conversely the benefits of investing into the restoration. The lack of financing restoration, shortage of legislation and policies that incentive to the ecosystem restoration, limited technical knowledge and the capacity for the ecosystem restoration and limited investment into the long-term research. The slide shows the village pond brimming at Kanavachi village in Maharashtra. Even during the drought, the ecosystem restoration such as this can be implemented as a part of existing governmental schemes. Ecosystem restoration requires everybody's participation. Further, while restoration goals have often taken the form of tree plantation, restoration initiatives would need to also provide the significant resources for the conservation and restoration of the freshwater, marine, coastal and other undervalued ecosystems. In realizing the restoration at a scale, a diverse group of stakeholders, including the civil society, academic institutions, women's groups, indigenous communities, youth, farmers group, and marginalized will also need to be a part of the of restoration. Individuals have an integral role to play ecosystem restoration through right lifestyle choices and raising the public awareness on its importance. Some examples of the individual action include the judicious use and management of the water, include the rainwater harvesting, waste segregation at source, recycling, planting the trees and encouraging the plantations of native species, developing and maintaining the green spaces, and choosing the nature inspired housing and energy efficient solutions. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is a global call to reimagine, recreate, and restore the balance in nature, and along with it, restore our sources of livelihood and our health and our quality of life. Let us make a peace with nature.